School's in session today to talk about hiring. We're going to talk about where hiring goes wrong and what founders can do about it, but not like this. Sales hiring always goes wrong for one of three reasons. We're going to get into each and every one of those reasons today, and we're actually going to add a fourth reason that affects sales management hiring. So if you're a founder and you're thinking about how to make sure that your first sales hiring goes well, this is the video for you. And if you've already got a team, you're going to want to check out the fourth thing, which is specific to sales management. I have been managing hiring for over 15 years. I hired 238 sales reps in my role as an operator, and as an advisor, I've seen hiring for companies like Mural, Envision, and Airbnb for Work. The sales reps that I've hired have mastered their craft at the companies we've been at, and I've seen them go on to bigger and better things. Managers or leaders or reps at companies like Apple and Salesforce and LinkedIn and Microsoft, big companies that impact us every day that are being supported by sales teams that have the same qualities that we're talking about. Let's start here. When you're thinking about the perfect sales rep that you want to go out and hire, you're probably thinking of somebody who has deep industry experience or they've worked for a specific brand. Let's say it's Google. The challenge here and the allure that most founders fall into when they over-index on experience with a particular brand or they over-index on the industry experience, they're missing some of the key components that are specific to your startup. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The three things that impact hiring most and lead to the biggest hiring mistakes starts with number one. We start this conversation at average contract value because if you don't know your average contract value, you can't find a rep who's really confident in pitching a product for that price. Let's say your average contract value is 100K and you hire a rep who maybe is a really strong rep who's also worked at a very similar company, but they've worked in self-service tools where they've solved problems for users who buy the $10,000 product. If somebody's used to a $10,000 product, they're not going to be able to talk about the same nuance as somebody who's used to a $100,000 product. Think about it in terms of, I don't know, let's say cars. Somebody who drives a really cheap car is probably not the person who's going to be an expert into how to go procure a really fancy car. The cars are different because there's different features, sure, but there's also a different way both cars are sold when it comes to talking about cost. When you buy a used car that's, let's say, $10,000 or less, oftentimes there's not financing. You go buy an expensive car, oftentimes the sales rep is talking to you about financing options. If you lease an expensive car, that sales rep also knows about your lease options, your buy options, and they can talk very much about how that car may or may not depreciate over time or what the resale value has been for other cars like it. That's not a conversation that happens on the used car lot when we're talking about something that's, let's say, $10,000 or less. And the same thing is happening for you and your product. Let's say you've over-indexed, like all do, around the industry, and you found somebody who's really confident in your industry. Let's say it's construction management software. They've worked for other companies that are very similar. They're ready to take the step into your SaaS startup. But you're starting out selling to 1 and 2 person small construction sites, and maybe you sell that product for, let's say, $10,000. The conversation that the employee that you're hiring, if they're coming out of a big company that maybe an Autodesk where they're used to selling a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 software package, they're not going to be able to have a $10,000 conversation. They're going to think about financing. They're going to think about OpEx versus CapEx and where the money's coming from. They're going to ask to meet the CFO. Things like this that just don't happen in a shop that's owned by 2 people. Having those conversations that aren't applicable essentially boils down to a cultural dissonance. The culture of buying software that's $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 is just very different. And we're going to talk about one of the main differences as our point number 2. Point number 2 is sales cycle. If I'm used to a transaction that takes 2 days and I'm put into an organization where the transaction takes 20 days, it's going to feel really different. What's more likely though is not 2 days and 20 days. It's more likely that you've got a $10,000 product that's purchased over the course of about 2 or 3 weeks versus a $200,000 product that may take a few months or even a year to buy. Those are different sales cycles, and those are actually different sales reps. Some sales reps are very strong at velocity sales, working short sales cycles, working for very meaningful but yet much smaller contract values. and they can have a very different conversation because it's about how do we quickly get this purchased and implemented? How do I get to the next step? If you've ever procured something where it feels like the rep is really demanding, that's somebody who's coming from that velocity background often. Your sales reps need to be versed in sales cycle. And part of that is how many meetings they need to have. A velocity salesperson might have just 1 or 2 meetings in the course of getting a $30K deal done in 30 days. On the other end, when you talk about a deal that takes 9 months to do and cost $1 million, that sales rep is having different check-in points with different buyers along the way. That brings us to the third point, which actually, we should have another third point. All right, bonus point number 3, the number of people in the deal. Okay, so you're picturing that sales rep, 9 months working on $1 million deal. They've got a lot of check-in points. Well, in the Challenger sale, in this book, The Challenger Sale, the team at CEB actually tells us the average number of people that are working on the buyer side of a deal is 6.8. This book was written a while back, so it's probably gone up quite a bit since then. Think about it. In these big organizations that are making $1 million investment in software, they're not just going to have one person say, yeah, this sounds good, here's $1 million. They're going to ask other departments. They're going to bring in IT. Is it compatible with our current infrastructure? They're going to bring in head of marketing, head of sales. And so as we start to get bigger deals that are more impactful for the organization that's buying them, there is going to be more people involved. So that's our new number 3, is reps who are comfortable having a multi-threaded sales conversation. Here's an org chart of a real deal that I worked on. I've changed everybody's names and I made up the name of a company, but this is a $300,000 renewal deal I did when I worked at a YC-backed data company several years ago. This deal, or this team, represents the number of people we had to go talk to. And you'll see there's 2 blank holes in this org chart because there are some people that we never met, but we knew they were influential. Now, if I had handed that renewal to one of my velocity sales reps who are very comfortable with a 10K deal over about 10 days, they're not going to work at the pace that we need to bring a 3rd person, bring a 4th person, bring a 5th person in. That process is often something that happens over the course of many months as we're starting to engage different stakeholders on the buy side. Okay, so far we've got the average contract value, the average sales cycle, how many days it takes to get that deal done. And then on the third thing, our new third thing, is the number of people that are involved in the deal. Now let me give you the third thing that I was actually thinking of, which is industry. How important the industry is really going to be a factor of not so much how important your industry is, but how important it is for the rep to be comfortable being in that industry. And it comes down to one very, very simple question. Who does your buyer want to talk to? In some industries, the buyer wants to talk to an expert. One of my clients sells medical devices. And in medical device technology, the buyer, as a doctor, wants to talk to another doctor. Sometimes they'll take the CEO, which is thankful for the startup. They have a CEO. They don't have a doctor on staff. That creates a sales challenge. And if we hand this off to a 23-year-old new seller who was used to a velocity sales team selling 10K deals over the course of a month, they're going to have a very different conversation to a doctor who's trying to bring in 6.8 people into a deal where it may take 9 or 10 months to make a decision on a multi-million-dollar piece of software, or in this case, a piece of hardware. So if your buyer isn't somebody who seems to really gravitate towards wanting to talk to an industry leader, you're off the hook for needing to require that. And that often means you're going to save quite a bit of headaches sourcing the right candidate. Number 5, with the old number 4, is actually pedigree. Typically, founders will over-index on pedigree, and there's 2 reasons why. The first one is our venture capital friends, our board members, our investors. Oftentimes, their network is pretty inclusive to either where they were an operator or what's been in their portfolio before. But let's say you're a VC invested in Salesforce. Well, if you're not building a CRM, hiring somebody who is a former leader at Salesforce is probably not that helpful to you. So what we're looking for is a manager who understands our 4 other points. Manager who understands the importance of the sales cycle. A manager who has managed reps on that average contract value. I understand what that rep's role is in the industry. It may be more important or less important depending on your perspective. And that last piece, which we added in the middle there, was those multi-threaded deals, those 6.8 decision makers. If they understand all that, then we're going to be just fine. But when we hire for pedigree, oftentimes we're going to miss at least one of those things, if not many of them. So here's what we do. When we go bring someone in and we say, hey, this is maybe we can't check all 4 boxes, but we can check 2 or 3 of them. Then we need to think very carefully about if that last box that we can't check is a deal breaker box. If it's not a deal breaker box, then we know that we're taking that risk. We're going to manage, we're going to support, we're going to develop that person towards that piece. Maybe they check the other 3 boxes, but they haven't been in the industry before. Okay, that's fine. Maybe they know the industry really well. They know the sales cycle really well. They know the people they're going to be dealing with, but the deals they worked on before are a different size. So now we got to think, if that manager is used to managing a velocity team with small deals, it's going to be very different than if they're used to managing a team that had much bigger deals. These are all the questions that you as the founder need to ask so that we can make sure that we avoid all the hiring mistakes that we've talked about before. If you like this video, send it to a friend.